After the checkered flag falls for the 2022 Phoenix season finale in the NASCAR Cup Series, Aric Almirola will hang up his helmet and retire, seemingly for good. And so that raises a lot of questions, as in the most obvious question, who will replace him? There are a lot of rumors that have been swirling around in the last couple of months leading up to May in terms of who could replace him. And now the rumors are starting to heat up a little bit in terms of a potential candidate for that number 10. I wanted to take a look at 10 potential candidates for that number 10 and talk about who could potentially replace Aric Almirola. I'll be starting from the least likely to happen to the most likely to happen. So without further ado, let's get into it. The least likely candidate to get that number 10 is Christopher Bell. Bell's 2022 season thus far has been pretty solid to say the least. Since Atlanta, he has been on the up and up and looks to make the playoffs and potentially get a win. I mean, he had a winning car at Kansas Speedway this past week, and so if he can continue that momentum, he very well could join Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch in the winning club. Right now, Christopher Bell's future is a little bit murky. When you've got a guy like Ty Gibbs moving up through the ranks, you never know what could happen. I mean, the same thing happened to Erik Jones, who I'll talk about on this list. Jones got booted out in favor of Bell, and so who's to say the same thing couldn't happen to Bell? Joe Gibbs Racing and Toyota as a whole are notorious for kicking out young drivers in favor of another young driver. And if it's a Joe Gibbs' grandson that we're talking about here, I don't see why it couldn't happen. At number 9 on this list, we have Erik Jones. Since Jones got the boot from Joe Gibbs Racing, he's been treated pretty unfairly in the world of NASCAR. He got relegated to a mid-pack team, and while he is pushing that team to its limits, I mean, he nearly won a race at Fontana, it's certainly not a car capable of what his talent might have, what his potential might withhold. And so a team like Stewart-Haas Racing could be something that Erik Jones could look into. I mean, with Stewart-Haas Racing, who knows what Jones could do? It'd be a second shot at tasting clean air for once, as Erik Jones isn't spending too much time up in the front of the field like he should. He's a proven champion in the ranks of NASCAR, and he could be somebody that could revitalize Stewart-Haas Racing, because right now, Stewart-Haas Racing is nowhere near where it needs to be, except Chase Briscoe. Next up, we have Zane Smith at number 8 on this list. Zane Smith is a pretty good option because he is in the Ford development system. Barring his Las Vegas DQ, where he ended up finishing 38th on the scoring pylon, he has had a pretty good Truck Series season with 3 wins on the chart, and he looks to be a serious championship contender. He's currently sitting 3rd in the point standings thus far. It's not unusual to see a Truck Series driver leap up into the Cup Series. I mean, Todd Gilliland did it just this past offseason. However, Zane Smith might want to look at Front Row Motorsports as a potential option, and Front Row Motorsports probably wants to have Zane Smith in their driver development system in the Cup Series one day. Maybe next year, maybe the year after that. I think that Zane Smith's future is at Front Row Motorsports, but who knows? Maybe Front Row wants to renew Michael McDowell and Todd Gilliland, and maybe Stewart-Haas Racing could snag the 3-time Truck Series winner. At number 7, we have Brandon Jones. Brandon Jones has been in the Xfinity Series forever, and it's about time that he gets at least some shot up in the Cup Series. I mean, we don't know what he's capable of. Brandon Jones is a case of an Xfinity Series D-lister turning into a C-lister, turning into a B-lister, and then eventually turning into an A-lister. I mean, I think you could call him that at least now. I mean, he has a win. He beat Kyle Busch off raw speed a couple of years ago. And so Brandon Jones might have the talent, might have the cahoots to go out there and battle with some of NASCAR's top contenders. So you never know. We don't know what Brandon Jones is capable of, and you put him in a Stewart-Haas Racing car, he could go out there and run competitively. Now, obviously, he's been pretty embedded with the Toyota TRD development system since 2018, and so I don't know how well that would work. He'd be burning some serious bridges, and there would be no turning back from this point on. Ford doesn't really have a last resort option in terms of their development system, so if things go south here, whether that's sponsorship, whether that's Brandon Jones just not living up to that talent, who knows what Brandon Jones might have. He might just be relegated to the Truck Series. Maybe he might not even be in NASCAR after the Stewart-Haas Racing deal, if the Stewart-Haas Racing deal doesn't go as planned. So it could be a risky alternative. Now, speaking of an Xfinity Series driver that's been here for some time, we have Daniel Hemric. Hemric won Rookie of the Year in 2019, which seemingly gets forgotten, and really the only noteworthy thing he did in 2019 was win a pole at Kansas. Now, Daniel Hemric's 2019 season was terrible, sure, but Richard Childress Racing as a whole was pretty bad across the board. Both cars, Austin Dillon included, missed the playoffs. And so Daniel Hemric got the boot because Tyler Reddick was a two-time Xfinity Series champion, back-to-back Xfinity Series champion at that point, and Hemric has basically been wandering around the Xfinity Series between several different organizations. He spent some time at Junior Motorsports, spent some time at Joe Gibbs Racing, waltzed into a championship, and now is spending some time at Kaulig Racing, and honestly isn't faring too well. So it might be time for Daniel Hemric to really look at a do-or-die situation right here, and maybe just look at just gunning it and going up into the Cup Series. I mean, he is running a part-time schedule with Kaulig Racing in the Cup Series, so it's not like he's been absent from the Cup Series since he got the boot at the end of 2019. So he's got some experience with the next-gen car, so I don't think there would be any issues there. However, I think really the only issues would be sponsorship. Will Stewart-Haas Racing even hire him? Does any Cup team want to hire Daniel Hemric besides Kaulig Racing for a partial schedule? That's definitely something to look at. I mean, I don't really see anybody in particular talking about Daniel Hemric, even though he is an Xfinity Series champion. So who knows? Maybe his future is pretty grim right now. At number 5, we have Ricky Stenhouse Jr., and this might sound like an outlandish idea for those who don't know about the inners of NASCAR, but Ricky Stenhouse Jr. currently is part of a driver's agency called Kevin Harvick Incorporated. Kevin Harvick Incorporated manages salaries for drivers, manages where these drivers are going, and so Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is part of that team along with some other drivers, and because he is affiliated to Kevin Harvick, maybe Kevin Harvick puts in the word for Ricky Stenhouse Jr., and Stenhouse could get the seat. Stenhouse honestly doesn't bring a whole lot of sponsorship. A lot of his sponsors are JTG-related sponsors. Really, the only sponsor that I can think of that is from Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is NOS Energy. So that is a little bit questionable. That's on some shaky grounds, but maybe Stewart-Haas had some sponsors themselves. So maybe sponsorship isn't as big of a concern as it might seem hypothetically. But Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is a solid driver at best. I mean, he's a great plate track racer, obviously has those 2 wins. He seems like a pretty talented race car driver. Again, over a decade ago, he won an Xfinity Series champion. Not just one, 2. But, it wasn't really a competitive field. Really, the only driver that gave him a run for his money was Elliott Sadler. So, again, we don't know what Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is fully capable of. He's driven for mid-pack teams his entire Cup career. He's basically driven for struggling organizations his entire career. So, to finally thrust him into one of the most competitive teams in NASCAR does seem a little bit rushed, does seem a little bit absurd, and so that's exactly why Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is only at number 5. At number 4, we have Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson is one of the hottest drivers in the NASCAR Xfinity Series right now. He's currently taking part in a 3-way championship battle between AJ Allmendinger, Ty Gibbs, and himself. He's got 2 wins on the chart and is pretty consistent for the most part, with his only weak suit being the short tracks. Noah Gragson is a very, very talented driver and is probably one of the best Xfinity Series, in fact, the best Xfinity Series driver right now who does not have a Cup Series ride. And honestly, I don't think it's a matter of if Noah Gragson will get into the Cup Series, it's a matter of when. And Noah Gragson himself said that he is eyeing a Cup Series ride. And I think that if Noah Gragson spends at least one more year in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, it'd be a downright travesty. He's currently in his 4th year of NASCAR Xfinity Series competition, and 5 years in the Xfinity Series is borderline Brandon Jones, like being a lifer in the Xfinity Series, etc., etc. So I don't think that, Noah Gragson wants to be a lifer in the Xfinity Series. I think he at least wants to give the Cup Series an attempt. He was in the conversation last silly season. I think he's going to be he is in the conversation this silly season. Pretty much every ride that's open, Noah Gragson is going to be affiliated with. And why not throw him into the conversation with SHR? He's a driver that could seriously, seriously revitalize Stewart-Haas Racing and bring that team back into the championship 4. He could be a serious torchbearer to Kevin Harvick. Kevin Harvick is Kevin Harvick. He's aging. He's on the verge of retiring. And a young, hot prospect like Noah Gragson is exactly what Stewart-Haas Racing needs to pivot themselves in the future. At number 3, we have Riley Herbst. Now, Riley Herbst is really only up high on this list for 2 reasons. A, he's a Stewart-Haas Racing driver, and B, he's a Stewart-Haas Racing driver that brings a lot of funding. And when I mean a lot of funding, I mean a lot of funding. Riley Herbst, he would not really even have this Xfinity Series ride, if he did not bring the funding he has. Riley Herbst has talent. I'm not denying that. He's got some talent. He did pretty well in ARCA. He did okay at best at Joe Gibbs Racing, and he seems to be on the up and up with Ford. He's really Ford's only true hope for the future at this point. And the fact that he is Ford's future, just kind of tells you the tale right now in terms of Ford's development line, which is exactly why I think that Ford probably needs to reach beyond just their own development line. Maybe into Chevys, like I mentioned with Noah Gragson, maybe into Toyota, like I mentioned with Christopher Bell and Brandon Jones. But if they need to stick with Ford for OEM-related reasons, then Riley Herbst is an option that they need to consider. Now, at number 2 is a driver that has been growing in terms of the silly season rumors, and that's John Hunter Nemechek. John Hunter Nemechek is still relatively young and still definitely has a Cup future in store for him. John Hunter Nemechek, just a few years ago, was driving for GMS Racing, running in the teens on a good weekend, and wasn't really doing well. Wasn't even a Cup prospect. A lot of people didn't even know what John Hunter Nemechek had in store for his future. You have Matt Tiff exiting the team, you have David Reagan exiting the team, and now all of a sudden, John Hunter Nemechek is thrust into Front Row Motorsports, really against his own will. I mean, he had to join Front Row Motorsports. He didn't have a ride, Front Row Motorsports didn't have a driver, and he was just kind of filling in for them, and he joined FRM, ran in the mid-20s, caused the most accidents in the field, was downright terrible, got some top 10s here and there, but for the most part, he wasn't that great. He was probably the worst driver between Anthony Alfredo and, Todd Gilliland this year, in terms of the last couple of years of that 38 car at FRM. In 2021, he ended up joining Kyle Busch Motorsports because it's better to be really good in a series that maybe not a lot of people care about than be bad in a series that a lot of people care about. And so Nemechek ended up tearing it up in the Truck Series, maybe got too hot too early, and ended up tripping in the Championship 4. In 2022, he has a win at Darlington. He's looking to cobble together a championship run just like he did in 2021. But I don't think John Hunter Nemechek wants to be like a Ron Hornaday Jr. who goes up into the Cup Series, doesn't do too well, and then makes a name for himself in the Truck Series. I don't think that's what Nemechek wants for his future. I would like to think that John Hunter Nemechek wants to be a Cup Series driver again, and maybe a ride like Stewart-Haas Racing could be the ride that could tempt him to get back up into the Cup Series. Ford is the only OEM he has never won with, and so it could be a fresh start of sorts. He wouldn't really have any burned bridges with anybody at Ford, at least I wouldn't imagine so. It's only been 2 years since he left them. So I would imagine that Ford would be a pretty decent option for John Hunter Nemechek. And then at number 1, we have the driver that everybody is talking about, Ryan Preece. Ryan Preece was the driver that instantly popped up in everybody's minds as soon as they heard Aric Almirola and the word retire in the exact same sentence. Ryan Preece is the favorable option right here. Ryan Preece is basically taking the Alex Bowman approach in 2022. He's not really doing a whole lot in, at least not regularly, but he is racing sporadically between Cup, Xfinity, and trucks. And Ryan Preece showed everybody that he is Cup Series ready, at least to some degree. He hauled the mail with a Rick Ware racing car and qualified 13th at Dover and ended up being pretty decent until something broke on his car, I'm pretty sure. So Ryan Preece, I think, is fully Cup Series ready, and honestly is one of the best drivers right now in the lower ranks of NASCAR that does not have a competitive ride. The fact that Ryan Preece has not gotten a shot at a competitive ride up in the Cup Series is honestly a downright travesty. I mean, just look at what he did at Joe Gibbs Racing in the Xfinity Series. He won and was competitive. So Ryan Preece is a good driver, and I think a Stewart-Haas Racing seat would do him some good, would do Stewart-Haas Racing some good for sure. But I don't think that Stewart-Haas Racing is ready to just kind of zip it up, pack up, and say, yep, Ryan Preece, you're going to be the driver. You're exactly the driver you wanted, and all the fans would say we knew it all along. I don't think that Stewart-Haas Racing is completely sold on Ryan Preece. I think that they are going to wait it out. There are other candidates like I mentioned. And so that brings me to my question. Who do you think is going to potentially replace Aric Almirola in 2023? Is it any one of these 10 drivers? Maybe somebody else. Maybe somebody we're not even talking about could replace Aric Almirola in 2023. Let me know in the comment section below, and until next time, this has been the news. I'll see you.